Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today I'm testing the first 240Hz ultra-wide QD-OLED gaming monitor to hit my benchmark lab, the Gigabyte MO34WQC2, which is an extremely catchy and memorable name. All those letters and numbers, just love it. Anyway, what we're looking at here is a 34-inch 3440 by 1440 ultra-wide using a faster Samsung QD-OLED panel. The initial wave, including favourites such as the Dell AW3423DW, topped out at 175Hz, but newer variants of this panel have pushed up that refresh rate to 240Hz, which brings its refresh capabilities more in line with other OLEDs. What will be interesting to see is how the MO34WQC2 compares to the highly popular Dell Alienware AW3423DWF, which is still available for as little as $700 US, though over the last few months its typical price has sat between $800 and $900. Gigabyte are charging $1,070 for their 240Hz equivalent, which is a hefty premium to pay for the increased refresh rate, so this will have to be a stellar performer across all areas. Despite this Gigabyte monitor using a newer QD-OLED panel which began production in 2023, well after the initial batch of 34-inch ultra-wide panels, it doesn't appear to offer any of the enhancements we've seen from newer generations of QD-OLED technology. Its subpixel structure and screen composition appear identical to first-gen QD-OLEDs, meaning we're not getting the small improvements to text clarity and ambient light reflectivity that were introduced with the second generation. If you were specifically interested in a 240Hz ultrawide, hoping to receive enhancements to these areas relative to previous models like the AW3423DWF, this is a pretty disappointing discovery. While it's sad not to see an improved QD-OLED subpixel structure, the text clarity offered here is generally better than similar WOLED ultrawides like the ASUS PG34W CDM. There is some pink-green fringing along the upper and lower edges of text, so text clarity is not as good as a similar resolution LCD, but it's usable, and we've heard from many of you that don't even notice this artifact. The screen composition still reflects ambient light in brighter usage environments, raising apparent black levels when light sources are in front of the display. This hurts the richness of OLED blacks in some scenarios relative to WOLED panels that are typically capable of deeper blacks in bright rooms. To me, this is one of the biggest flaws with QD-OLED panels and hurts the experience when using the display with lights on or windows open. However, the issue can be mitigated by ensuring light sources are behind the display and there's little to no impact in dark rooms. Aside from ambient light reflectivity, the MO34WQC2 is a glossy screen like most other QD-OLEDs, so there are also some mirror-like reflections in brighter rooms. I find this aspect to reflection handling to be quite good as far as glossy screens go, and the lack of matte coating grain will please the clarity and vibrance purists. The overall design to the MO34WQC2 is okay, but it doesn't really look like a $1,000 monitor with its use of basic black plastic for exterior surfaces and its normal Gigabyte wide stand base. I know this is not an Aorus product, so it's not part of Gigabyte's highest product tier, but I think the build quality should be better at this price point. The thin OLED panel does look quite good, extending outwards from the typical OLED central box design, but most other aspects to the design are notably better on Gigabyte's newer Aorus OLEDs like the FO27Q3 and FO32U2P. The curve is the same 1800R as other QD-OLED ultrawides, which is a less aggressive curve than the 800R used on WOLED competitors. I'm probably biased as I use an 1800R curved ultrawide monitor for gaming, so I'm very familiar with it, but I far prefer the less noticeable 1800R curve to 800R, so that's a big tick for QD-OLED. One aspect of the design that I did like is the very tall stand, which at its maximum height is excellent for comfortable desk usage. It gets significantly taller than other options like the AW3423DWF, which adds a lot of versatility for an ergonomic setup. There's also swivel and tilt support with a good range of motion. Gigabyte offer a great range of ports, including two HDMI 2.1 48 gigabits per second ports, one DisplayPort 1.4 with DSC, and one USB-C supporting DP Alt mode. These are complemented by a 2-port USB 3.2 hub and KVM switch. All ports support the full 240Hz refresh rate, but the USB-C port only has 18 watts of power delivery, which is not sufficient for charging most laptops. The OSD is controlled through a directional toggle behind the front Gigabyte logo, and it includes Gigabyte's typical range of features. You get separate display modes, lots of gaming-specific features like crosshairs, shadow boosting, FPS counters, and other information readouts, and a good amount of OLED care features as well. It's a fast and easy to navigate interface, which is always nice to see. OLED monitors remain a risk of permanent burn-in when used to display static content for long periods of time. This makes OLED a less than ideal choice for desktop app usage and productivity work, though occasional usage in these ways is fine and unlikely to cause burn-in. Our burn-in tests are still ongoing if you want to check them out on the channel. Gigabyte currently offer a 3-year burn-in warranty as clearly specified on their website, which is in line with what other manufacturers are currently offering. Response time performance is excellent on this QD-OLED monitor as it is for other OLED displays we've tested so far. OLED offers lightning fast response times around the 0.3 millisecond mark at its maximum 240Hz refresh rate, and that leads to fantastic motion clarity. OLEDs also maintain the same performance at all refresh rates, so even when testing at 120 or 60Hz, we see similar results in the 0.3 millisecond range. This is a nice benefit for variable refresh gamers that results in a single overdrive mode experience. In contrast, many LCDs typically perform worse at lower refresh rates relative to their maximum refresh. The major limiting factor to OLED motion performance right now is the refresh rate itself. As a sample and hold monitor, OLEDs do still have some blur in fast motion scenes, and the level of blur depends on the refresh rate. At 240Hz, clarity is very good, delivering a fast experience for competitive gamers, but when running the display closer to 60Hz, clarity is reduced simply because the refresh rate is reduced, even though response time performance is basically identical at 240 and 60Hz. This also applies to comparisons between 240Hz and 175 or 165Hz ultrawides. 240Hz models are clearer when run at 240Hz because the refresh rate is higher, even though response times are similar. But if you run both at the same refresh rate, you'll see similar results. However, having such fast response times gives OLED a noticeable advantage over slower response time LCD models running at the same refresh rate. There is effectively no difference in response time performance between this QD-OLED and other OLED monitors, including WOLED variants. This means motion clarity is identical when the refresh rate is the same. However, OLEDs are much faster than even the fastest LCDs I've tested, and this is true whether we look at the best performance or average performance across the refresh rate range. Not only are OLEDs fast, they also have no overshoot artifacts, which can be an issue with some LCD models. When viewing cumulative deviation results, we can see that OLEDs get much closer to ideal response time behavior, and in most cases offer performance an order of magnitude better in this metric than LCDs. In practice, this leads to around a 1.5x advantage in clarity at a given refresh rate. So 240Hz QD-OLEDs like the MO34WQC2 offer a similar experience to 360Hz LCDs. The only displays with clearly superior clarity are LCDs that offer elite backlight strobing, a feature that comes with its own set of limitations, like incompatibility with variable refresh rates, and usually this is not available in an ultra-wide format. Input latency is excellent, offering a sub 0.5 millisecond processing delay in both the SDR and HDR modes. Combined with fast response times and a high refresh rate, this OLED feels very snappy to use and is well suited to a wide variety of games. With that said, most other QD-OLEDs also have low input lag, so the main difference between the various models is the refresh rate, which does impact latency. In terms of power consumption, there's no real difference between this Gigabyte model and the AW3423DWF, both consuming around 85 watts to display a full white image at 200 nits. This is pretty much as expected for this size of QD-OLED. WOLEDs do have an efficiency advantage when comparing full white power consumption due to their additional white subpixels, so the PG34W ends up consuming around 20 watts less in this test. However, across a wide range of content, we typically see QD-OLED and WOLED models trade blows in power. All QD-OLEDs that we've tested so far offer a very similar color space. In the case of the MO34WQC2, we're looking at 99% DCI-P3 coverage, as well as 98% Adobe RGB coverage, strong results for viewing HDR content or working in those color spaces. In total, I saw 81.7% coverage of Rec 2020, which as you can see from the chart is basically the same as other QD-OLEDs that I've tested, and a higher color gamut than competing WOLEDs. For SDR color accuracy out of the box, this Gigabyte monitor is pretty average. My unit had a slight pink tint out of the box, and the gamma curve is a bit wonky, leading to average delta E's. There's also the usual issue of oversaturation, as the gamut is left unclamped by default. So when you compare this to other monitors across both grayscale and color checker, the results are unimpressive. Gigabyte do offer an sRGB mode, though it locks you out of features like white balance settings. The sRGB mode is better calibrated and has lower delta E's, plus doesn't produce oversaturated colors and reduces the amount of red tint you'll see in skin tones, for example. However, in terms of accuracy, it's really nothing special, falling into the middle to lower parts of our comparison charts. Gigabyte have produced some really well-calibrated sRGB modes in the past, so I was disappointed in these numbers. Accuracy simply isn't really a standout here. Calibration, of course, can be improved through CalMan with great results, as this is a wide gamut monitor with great coverage of DCI-P3 and Adobe RGB. However, at a premium price point, I would have preferred to see more work being done in the hardware and a broader set of hardware controls without limitations. Maximum brightness in the SDR mode is practically identical to the other QD-OLED monitors I've tested. The Gigabyte model produces 251 nits full screen white, 15 nits behind the PG34WCDM with its WOLED panel, a negligible difference. This is below the level of most LCDs, but sufficient for typical indoor use cases. Gigabyte disables any automatic brightness limiter in the SDR mode, so there's no need for a uniform brightness setting, as brightness is always capped to around 250 nits. This prevents annoying behavior where the monitor gets brighter as you resize apps, and I just prefer it to work this way. Minimum brightness of just 4 nits also provides an excellent range for people that want to use it in a very dim room. I was impressed with the viewing angles of this panel. They are very wide, which makes it easy to view the display even at quite extreme angles, though of course the curve needs to be factored in here, as it does reduce the size of the sweet spot for viewing. Uniformity was also very good with my unit, nice and uniform viewing full white and no dirty screen effect viewing dark greys. The Gigabyte MO34WQC2 is well suited to HDR from a hardware perspective. OLED panels, including QD-OLED, directly emit light and have individual pixel control, which makes them ideal for displaying HDR content. This feature allows each pixel to independently vary from fully switching off to displaying bright highlights, giving us deep zero-level blacks and per-pixel local dimming. The level of control OLEDs provide minimizes blooming in high contrast scenarios and allows for clean distinction between bright and dark areas that are close together. Compared to LCDs with a multi-zone backlight, OLEDs have far fewer ugly illumination artifacts, which are most noticeable when displaying difficult scenarios like subtitles or star fields, and there are no zone transitions as bright objects move around the display. With per-pixel control as its main advantage, OLEDs are best at displaying high-contrast scenes with rich shadow detail, which is a key aspect to a good HDR presentation. Darker content interspersed with dazzling bright highlights brings out the best in OLED displays, as does HDR content with fast motion. For gamers especially, input latency on most OLEDs is low in the HDR mode. The weakness to the HDR presentation on an OLED is overall brightness. While peak brightness can be high in the best cases, full screen brightness is low, and this limits the punch in bright daytime scenes. LCDs may not have per-pixel control, but zone backlights can simply get significantly brighter in bright scenes. Depending on what you want out of an HDR monitor, your preference could swing more towards LCDs or more towards OLEDs, but typically speaking, OLEDs are a great choice that deliver a fantastic HDR presentation. Unfortunately, while the hardware itself is quite capable, Gigabyte have let the HDR experience down through a more limited range of HDR configurations than we see on their flagship Aorus monitors. With the latest Aorus monitors, we effectively get 3 main configurations, a true black mode and a peak 1000 nit mode like most other QD-OLEDs, as well as an HDR game mode that features boosted brightness. With the MO34WQC2, there is no peak 1000 nit configuration and not many HDR modes at all. In fact, there's just one overall HDR mode with the ability to switch between 2 EOTF configurations via the APL stabilize setting in the OLED care section. The default HDR configuration, which has the APL stabilize setting on middle, gives an experience that's nearly identical to the true black modes seen on other QD-OLEDs. We get decent EOTF tracking at all window sizes with no aggressive dimming, but overall brightness is capped to just 450 nits. This is the most accurate mode with the least brightness on offer. When switching the APL stabilize setting to high, we unlock 1000 nits of peak brightness at the expense of EOTF accuracy. At small window sizes, EOTF tracking is bad and very inaccurate, boosting brightness significantly. This has the effect of raising brightness above what it should be by over 2x in some darker scenes, although 1000 nits is achievable in these scenes. But at larger window sizes and for the brighter portion of the EOTF curve, it more closely follows the expected curve and produces okay accuracy. This means in brighter scenes we see good brightness and acceptable accuracy. What's missing here is the configuration that gives you 1000 nits of brightness as well as good accuracy in darker scenes, typically labelled peak 1000 on other QD-OLEDs. That configuration is particularly useful for watching videos, which are typically lower APL, and for playing some types of games. For the best accuracy in this content, there's really no choice but to cap the overall brightness to just 450 nits. This is also another QD-OLED gaming monitor that is unable to give users both 1000 nits of peak brightness and decent high APL brightness at the same time without sacrificing accuracy. There is no single HDR mode that works well for all content, and it's essential that future QD-OLED monitors overcome this limitation. In synthetic testing, there's no difference between full screen brightness across the various modes, which are all in the 250 to 280 nit range, like other QD-OLEDs. Similarly, all can do 450 nits at 10%, which is in line with other QD-OLEDs. However, at a 2% window size, you can only achieve 1000 nits of peak brightness when setting APL stabilized to high. The default mode is capped to just 460 nits for the brightest elements. For other monitors, the most accurate mode that offers full panel brightness is being used in the chart. For real scene brightness, neither of the included configurations is especially impressive. The default mode is dim, with its only real strength being good brightness in brighter, higher APL scenes. There was also a surprising amount of dimming occurring even in this mode, which differs from the true black modes found on other QD-OLEDs. The boosted brightness APL stabilized high configuration maintains good performance in bright scenes while increasing brightness in lower APL content, but struggles to actually achieve 1000 nits in real world scenes where it really should be, and there's still a small amount of dimming or EOTF tracking issues for mid APL content. How this compares to other monitors is tricky. The best AW3423DWF configuration gets brighter for lower APL content, but suffers from the usual QD-OLED dimming issues. The PG34WCDM gets much brighter in general and doesn't dim, making that WOLED the leading candidate for brightness behavior, although it has other drawbacks as seen in that review. When assessing HDR accuracy, it's a continuation of what I was just saying. The default configuration offers decent accuracy, but as soon as you want to enable 1000 nits, you have to throw accuracy out of the window. Color volume, however, is very strong, matching other QD-OLEDs and offering a wider volume than WOLEDs assisted by much higher color brightness. In the Essentials checklist, Gigabyte do a good job of advertising this monitor. It's a real HDR product with performance that matches the listed specifications for the most part, outside of the usual issues with response time numbers. In the feature support matrix, this is a very typical showing for a QD-OLED, generally great numbers put up across the contrast and motion sections, plus quite a few feature inclusions such as a KVM switch, graceful SDR-HDR switching, built-in speakers, and user upgradable firmware. However, there's also a few downsides, such as the lack of USB-C with decent power delivery, the locked sRGB mode, and the risk of permanent burn-in. I also want to highlight two further things in this list. This monitor does not provide acceptable HDR performance on all GPUs, as brightness on an AMD GPU was consistently 100 to 200 nits lower than on an NVIDIA GPU, likely due to the use of FreeSync Premium Pro. This can be fixed through the usual EDID hack, though it shouldn't perform like this out of the box. Also, there are some minor flickering concerns in some games typical of modern OLED panels, though in the vast majority of titles this won't be noticeable. Overall, the Gigabyte MO34WQC2 is a monitor that should be better than it is. It's a premium product costing over $1,000 US, but doesn't have the level of performance or tuning that we've become accustomed to at the high end. Despite packing a newer QD-OLED panel that increases the refresh rate to 240Hz in this ultra-wide format, not enough has been done to justify the large price premium over existing popular options like the Alienware AW3423DWF. The refresh rate increase is obviously a good thing, bringing this format up from 175Hz to 240Hz. With the same elite response times as other OLEDs, the higher refresh rate brings better motion clarity when games are run over 175 FPS. This is a genuine benefit for people that have the sort of performance to run games at those sorts of frame rates, including through frame generation techniques. but it's not a must-have feature if you're generally expecting to play games at a lower refresh rate. There's no difference in clarity between this Gigabyte model and the older Alienware at, say, 120Hz. I was hoping that with a new higher refresh rate panel, we'd be getting a newer generation of QD-OLED technology, but that's not the case. No subpixel structure enhancements or better screen composition relative to first-gen ultrawides. Brightness characteristics are also basically identical, so there's not a lot else that's been improved with this release outside of the refresh rate. Where I think Gigabyte have let this model down is in its tuning and features. HDR performance could be better, with Gigabyte choosing to omit HDR modes that are found on many other QD-OLEDs. This is coupled with mediocre accuracy in the SDR mode and a locked sRGB mode. I really like the level of height that you can get out of the stand, but the overall build quality is lackluster as well. Priced at $1,070 US, Gigabyte needed to convince buyers that it's worth spending an extra $300 to $400 on this model relative to the AW3423DWF, and I think they've failed in that area. The only tangible benefit is the higher refresh rate, and I just wouldn't spend upwards of 30% more to get 240Hz. Other than this feature, I actually think the Alienware model is better in general, so that makes the high price tag exceptionally hard to swallow. In Australia, there's about a 20% price difference at the moment between these two models, which is more palatable, but it still fails the value test. I don't think the MO34WQC2 is all that competitive up against other 240Hz variants either. It's priced at a similar level to the WOLED-based Asus PG34W CDM, but that same panel is available in the LG 34GS95QE at just $800. So again, the Gigabyte model is overpriced compared to 240Hz WOLED Ultrawides, though I do think some aspects to the QD-OLED panel are better. It's also more expensive than the MSI version of this QD-OLED, the MPG341CQPX, which retails for $1,000 US. With the AW3423DWF pushing as low as $700 these days, and other ultrawides dropping below $1,000, I just don't think Gigabyte can justify a price tag over $1,000 while only offering an increased refresh rate. At $900, yeah, okay, might make sense. At $800, even better, but $1,070 is just too much for what is on offer with this product. So anyway, that's it for this Gigabyte QD-OLED monitor review. If you do appreciate our monitor testing here at Monitors Unboxed, then please do consider subscribing to the channel to get more monitor content in your inbox, and also supporting us via our Patreon or Floatplane accounts. Links to those are in the description below. If you sign up, you'll get access to some cool benefits like our ICC profiles that we generate during the review process. We've also got our Discord community, which is a great place to chat with fellow monitor enthusiasts about buying monitors, future monitors, some of the testing that we do here. So plenty of good stuff in there. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.